All right, so in terms of a roller coaster plot diagram, many of the stories you might read in school probably will fit right into this diagram. Only have one introduction, one rising action, climax, falling action, and resolution. But when we talk about these bigger books, these chapter books, sometimes they might have more than one introduction. We always think introduction as the beginning, where we're first introduced to the characters and setting, but throughout a bigger story, you might have different places where you're introduced to new characters, new main characters, and of course we know a story always has different settings. Same being said for the rising action, we know that's the problem. Well, in a bigger story, you might come across a bunch of problems that can reach a point and that the characters solve before they get to the very end of the story. So a lot of times these first 4 stages will happen a lot, especially in a bigger story. This book happens to be 46 chapters, so I think we're going to come across a lot of rising actions, climaxes, and falling actions. So that being said, we've already kind of come across a little bit. Our first rising action was the huntsman chasing May and Jack, and then the climax was kind of when he caught up to them with that axe, and then Jack tried to solve that first problem by outsmarting the huntsman and having the horse chase him off. So let's see what happens in chapter 8. I said, I wish you'd mentioned that your grandmother was Snow White, Jack repeated. Would have been easier than figuring it out on my own. Snow White, May said, her eyes narrowing as she glared at him. Just because I'm in some kind of fantasy world doesn't make me stupid. Nah, Jack said. If anything, you would have been born that way. She punched him for that. Explain what you're talking about, she growled. You're talking about the Snow White? Like the Wicked Queen and all? Yes. Did she ever talk about the Wicked Queen? Jack asked, his eyes going wide. No, because my grandmother isn't a character in a fairy tale. Fairies don't have tails, Jack said, pointing at the fairy in May's hair, whose behind was sticking straight up in the air as she snored. Not too observant, are you? He said. May snorted. I'm gonna observe me punching you again in a second. Not tails, tails, spelled T-A-L-E-S in the book. So the other tail is spelled T-A-I-L-S. So it's a homophone. They sound the same, but they're spelled differently and they mean different things. Stories. Anyway, Snow White isn't real. She's made up. That's what the Wicked Queen used to say, Jack told her. The Queen started rumors that Snow White wasn't real. Other people thought Snow White had died, but I guess she was just, well, in punk. Jack smiled. You have no idea how great that news is, that Snow White is still alive. Okay, fine, May said. Snow White's real here. You've got fairies, you've got magic books. You probably have cats walking around in boots, too. Not anymore, Jack said. If there ever were cats like that, they were hunted down years ago, with the rest of the talking animals. That shut the princess up for a moment. What, seriously? She said finally. Are you kidding? Jack shook his head. It's a long story. Anyway, Snow White disappeared back at the end of the Great War, and no one's heard from either her or the Wicked Queen since. But why would you think my grandmother is Snow White? May asked. I mean, her name's Eudora Winterbourne, and don't make some kind of stupid connection between winter and snow. Look at the facts, Jack said. First, your grandmother is the spitting image of Snow White. Pale skin, black hair, beautiful. Right, May said, the fairest one of all, I get it. But you just described like half a bajillion women. Second, Jack continued, ignoring her, did you hear what she and the huntsman were talking about? They mentioned the Wicked Queen and betrayal and Snow White. And the mirror, Jack shuddered. If the Wicked Queen has her mirror again, we're all dead. Mirror, May asked. It's the Wicked Queen's most powerful magic, Jack said. From what people say, her magic mirror knows everything and answers any question you ask it, even if what you're asking it about hasn't happened yet. That doesn't make sense, May said. How could it know the future? Jack looked at her oddly. I just said it's magic. Oh, okay. Thanks for the explanation, she said. So my grandmother mentioned something about a mirror and the Wicked Queen. It doesn't make her Snow White. Think about the stories you've heard, Jack said. The Wicked Queen sent her huntsman out to kill Snow White, but Snow White escaped. The huntsman must have been tracking her down this whole time. And when he finally found her, and you, he brought her back to the Wicked Queen. Not exactly how I remember it, May said, her forehead crinkling. But who knows? My grandmother never let me listen to any of those stories for some reason. Anyway, what was that great war thing you mentioned? Jack paused, forcing himself not to remember certain bad memories. Basically, the queen of a tiny kingdom invaded all the lands around her, destroying everything she came across. She'd taken over the entire eastern half of the continent before the western kingdoms decided to unite against her. Most people say it was Snow White who actually brought us all together to fight the Wicked Queen, as people started calling her. But it didn't go well. The kingdoms couldn't stand up to the Wicked Queen's armies of goblins, trolls, dragons, pretty much any kind of monster you can imagine. It also didn't help that the Wicked Queen had her magic mirror. It's hard to win a battle when your enemy knows exactly what you're planning. Well, yes, May said. But something happened that the queen somehow didn't see coming. I guess that's the limit of the mirror. If you don't ask the right questions, you're out of luck. One of the Wicked Queen's inner circle of knights, people called them her eyes. One of them betrayed her. This knight supposedly fell in love with Snow White and helped her and a small group of rebels break into the Wicked Queen's castle. You probably heard of most of them, Rapunzel, Rose Red, who people say was Snow's sister, the Piper and his magical flute, Edward, the cursed prince, and the Wolf King. I thought you said all the animals were gone, May asked. The Wolf King might be gone now too, Jack said quietly. The only one of Snow White's group that anyone's seen since then is Rapunzel, who is now queen of the western kingdoms. We know they succeeded in defeating the Wicked Queen somehow because all the queen's armies dispersed and the Great War ended. But Snow White, the Wicked Queen, and the rest were never seen or heard from again. That was like 12 years ago now. So, May said, if no one's seen Snow White since, how did she end up in the real world? The real what? Jack asked. The real world, May said, where I'm from. She rolled her eyes. Okay, fine. How did she end up in Punk? She must have hidden herself there, Jack said. Some stories say that Snow White broke the queen's mirror during their final battle. And when your grandmother was taken, the huntsman told the little monster things to look for a missing piece of the mirror. Jack paused, then slowly turned to look at the necklace hanging around May's neck. She noticed his gaze and pulled the gold crown out from under her shirt. This, she said, you don't really think. This is a piece of the queen's magic mirror? She told you to keep it hidden, Jack said. And if it is, that might be all that's stopping the Wicked Queen from coming back. If she had a working mirror, she'd be all powerful again. Jack swallowed hard. Which means the only thing keeping the Wicked Queen from taking over the entire world is that necklace. May shot him a dark look. Well, at least you're not being overly dramatic. Despite her sarcasm, she shuddered and slipped the necklace back under her shirt. I'm not willing to say you're right, but I guess you could be close to somehow being almost right. Either way, sounds like we're going to need the help of my grandmother mentioned in her note, huh? Sounds like, Jack agreed. Only let's find it in the morning. He lay down a little more, with his head against the tree, exhaustion suddenly smacking him in the face. May did the same, and pretty soon their eyelids were drooping. I have to warn you, Jack said quietly. I'm not very good at this sort of thing. Good at what sort of thing? May asked, opening one eye slightly. Well, Jack said, if your grandmother is Snow White, then you really are a princess. Ha, May said drowsily. That's a problem for you? A bit, Jack admitted. I can't stand royalty. May laughed softly. Jack smiled too, taking one last look at May as the princess fell asleep. She really was cute, all things considered. And she didn't act like princesses in stories did, all useless and vulnerable and needing rescuing. Maybe some royals weren't actually that different from the rest of the world. He stopped himself there. His sleepiness must have been messing with his head. May was the granddaughter of Snow White, a member of one of the oldest royal families in existence, and she'd grown up in the lap of luxury, with more wealth than he could even imagine. She was as royal as they came, and therefore was nothing like him. Wouldn't it be funny if she were, though? The last thing he heard before he fell asleep was tiny, high-pitched laughing from all around him. Apparently, someone else thought it was funny, too. And that's the end of chapter 8. Check back tomorrow for chapter 9. Bye.